All right, welcome back, and it is 6 October. I'm gonna kind of go off script here and cover some things that have happened in the last 3 weeks. So we've had this former Secret Service agent, Paul Landis, come forward and talk about his experience in the JFK assassination and how he found a bullet, basically the magic bullet that we've all been talking about for 50 years, 60 years. He's the one that found it, apparently, according to his story, and he found it on the little section of the limousine where the bubble top would have fit in, the middle part there. So apparently it had popped out of JFK's back. So we're going to go over all this stuff that he said in the past and now. But if all this is true, it changes everything, because, well, I'll get into it, but basically you can take this fantasy of the Warren Commission single bullet theory and the magic bullet and throw it out the window, like we've all been trying to do the last 60 years. But, you know, people want to insist that, you know, that is the official story. Now, one thing I do find that's interesting, it's been 3 weeks now since the story came out. It was basically covered kind of generically, whitewashed in the regular news media. But that's about it. It kind of just took off and then it dropped. And so 3 weeks later, it's like it didn't happen. But anyway, we're going to go into this story and go into what it means. And anyway, I'll give you my assessment of what it means after we go over all this information. Alright, so here's the original news story. This is one of the news stories that appeared on NBC. Looks like it was about 12 September, which would have been about 3 days after the official announcement came out about this. And we'll get into it.
A single bullet he found in the back of that convertible. Now, the implications could be staggering. There's a lot of fact from fiction that we're going to be separating here, so we want to start with just a little bit of history and take you back to that fateful day in Dallas in 1963.
The motorcade is traveling at about 20 to 25 miles an hour. This is the scene of confusion. Something has happened here. The cameraman running toward the scene to the presidential car ahead of him. These films from outside the emergency room of Parkland Hospital in Dallas as the president is dying inside. Senator Ralph Yarborough, who saw the shooting, said he heard shots and then saw a Secret Service man pound his fist against a rear fender of the presidential car in anguish.
White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff has just announced that President Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time, which is about 35 minutes ago.
After being shot at.
After being shot.
By an unknown assailant.
By an unknown assailant.
During a motorcade drive through downtown Dallas.
During a motorcade drive through downtown Dallas.
A flash from Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead.
Bullet wounds. This is the latest information we have from Dallas. Of course, standing by to give you all available information as it comes to us. I will repeat with the greatest...
And the remains of John F. Kennedy are about to pass a memorial to another president assassinated.
Now, the final report by the Warren Commission concluded that 3 shots were fired. 1 shot passed through the president's back and exited through his neck. It may have also hit Texas Governor John Connally, seeming to ricochet inside his body, and that the last shot hit President Kennedy in the head. But here's the thing. The root of most conspiracies surrounding what happened deal with a mystery known as the magic bullet theory, all having to do with the shot that entered JFK's back, as doctors told Congress, and then again somehow allegedly exited through his neck, then pierced the governor. Sitting there in front of him, went through the governor's chest, shattering a rib, then exiting his body, then going back inside to his wrist, went through that, and then hit his leg. And that bullet was found intact at the hospital. Now, it was always assumed that it fell off the governor's stretcher, but today, that Secret Service agent who we are about to talk to says he's the one who found that bullet and put it on the stretcher. But before we get to him, let's take a quick look at this report from NBC's Liz Kurtz.
60 years after one of the most earth-shattering days in modern American history, when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas in 1963.
John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time.
Former Secret Service agent Paul Landis, who was with the president that day, is opening up for the first time about what he witnessed. For decades, the prevailing theory was that one bullet struck JFK and then hit Texas Governor John Connally, who was sitting in front of him. It became known as the magic bullet theory, which explained how one shooter could have fired all the shots. The theory is based on this bullet being found on Governor Connally's gurney at the hospital. But now, in a new book, Landis says he knows how it got there. The 88-year-old tells the New York Times he found that bullet lodged in the car seat behind where Kennedy was killed. He says he then took that bullet to the hospital and placed it on the president's gurney. It was a piece of evidence, he tells the Times, and I didn't want it to disappear or get lost. So it was, Paul, you've got to make a decision, and I grabbed it. But Landis now says he thinks the bullet may have rolled from Kennedy's gurney to Connally's, meaning it may not have been the bullet that injured Connally.
Dr. Aguilar, you've studied this case for years. How significant is this?
I think this is a significant piece of new evidence to support the idea that there was more than one gunman in Dealey Plaza.
Clint Hill, the Secret Service agent who climbed on the back of the limo after Kennedy was shot, questions Landis' story.
Why do you have doubts about his account?
Because if you check all the evidence, statements, things that happened, they don't line up. It doesn't make any sense to me that he's trying to put it on the president's gurney.
But Landis, who was not available for an interview with NBC News, tells the Times he made mistakes in his initial reports. He says he's been afraid to share his true story until now.
Liz Kreutz, NBC News.
Thanks so much, Liz. Paul Landis, a witness to the assassination.
All right, let's go back just a little bit here. Hold on one second.
True story until now.
Liz Kreutz, NBC News.
All right, so what he's about to say is that when the president arrived, the president was leaning over, the president was sitting here, and Jacqueline Kennedy was sitting here. The president was leaning over in her lap. She refused to let go of him. Clint Hill put a coat over the president's head. She refused to let go of him because she didn't want the people to see his head blown out and his brains all over the place, which you can understand that. So Clint Hill put his coat over the president's head, and the Secret Service agents pulled the president's body out of the car, and when they left, Landis is going to say here that he found a bullet on this little metal rim here. Okay? This metal rim would have been, we're going to show you pictures of where the president's shoulders are at. This is about where the president's shoulders would have been, and this is approximately where the hole was in the president's back. And so they're going to say here, apparently what happened is this bullet, when it was fired, they were using World War II ammunition. The charge wasn't as good, and So it didn't penetrate the president's body and go through. It just went into the back, and then because of the movement, the car was moving at a really fast pace of speed. But also before that, when the president got hit in the head, it slammed his body against the seat and shook out the bullet from his back, which tells you that the bullet that hit him in the head had to have been coming from the front, because a bullet coming from the back hitting the president in the head would have pushed his body forward. The bullet that hit him in the back would have stayed in the president's back. It's only because of the motion of the body slamming against the seat that the bullet popped out of the president's back. That's what caused that. Okay, so Landis is going to say that he found the bullet on the rim. First, he found bullet fragments, which weren't from that bullet, in the seat. And then he found the bullet right there. Then he takes it into the hospital, puts it on the president's gurney. Okay, that's later found and becomes the pristine bullet with the magic bullet theory. We're going to go over all that, where supposedly it goes through the president's back, pops out of his, goes up at a down angle, and then turns and goes up, pops up out of his neck, and then goes forward, turns, goes down into the right, and then comes back around and smashes into the right shoulder of Johnson, who you can see in the video has actually turned around to the right and is looking to see the direction of the shot, and that's when he gets hit. But you can see they both get hit at different times. And then this bullet crashes through Connolly's chest, does a turn in his body, goes over to where he's holding his hat up close to his, I guess you could say, his nipple, smashes into his wrist, shatters the wrist, goes through the wrist, and then goes at a downward angle now into his thigh and embeds in the thigh there. The funny thing is, they never find that bullet in Connolly's thigh. Even though they have bullet fragments, they never find that bullet in Connolly's thigh. And when they do find the bullet on the gurney, they assume it's the same one that had fallen out of Connolly's thigh. Although at Parkland, when they tell the story, they say that the bullet must have fallen out somehow the president's body somewhere during a cardiac massage, which doesn't make any sense if the bullet ends up in Connolly's thigh. So that's very interesting. So we'll get into this. We're going to listen to his story and see what he has to say here. Another thing I want to say is that, you know, nowadays this would be unacceptable for someone, especially in law enforcement, to pick up evidence and move it, put it in his pocket and move it to another location. Forensic physical evidence of gunshots, that's called destroying an evidence scene. Okay, it's also noted that the Secret Service was ordered to use a hose and wash the blood out of the limousine at the hospital. Okay, further destroying evidence. So in a real world situation today, if he had found that bullet, he wouldn't have touched it. He would have stayed at his location. He would have called a supervisor. Supervisor would have come on. They would have secured that. It's a crime scene, basically. That crime scene, surrounded it with police officers and taped it off until the forensics guys from the Dallas Police Department can get there. But we notice that they take the body, they literally steal the body, and they steal the limousine, which was the crime scene. And then they put it on Air Force One, and it literally isn't flying back to D.C., it's making an escape from a crime scene. So that's what we have here. And then we have an incompetent Secret Service agent who messes with, if you or I had stumbled upon a crime scene, okay, and picked up a bullet and moved it to another location, we would be charged with the crime, okay? This is why I think that, you can say that, okay, he was under shock and all these things, but, I'm pretty sure even back in the 60s they would have trained, and he was new, maybe just a few years on the force, they would have trained a Secret Service agent on how to handle evidence at a crime scene, okay? So, again, no excuse. Again, even if he had it in his pocket, he shouldn't have put it on the gurney. He should have handed it to a supervisor. So I think what happened is the reason he doesn't talk about this, if this occurred, in his Treasury report, after-action Treasury report we're going to read, is because he knows the implications of his mistake of what he did, that he really fucking screwed up, okay? If that's what he did, and that's why he's talking about it when he's 80-something instead of when he's 60-something. Now, he's going to say that, I never heard of the single bullet Warren Commission report. I never read it. I put it out of my mind. I moved on with my life. But it was so traumatic that he had to quit the Secret Service. But he never read anything about any of the theories about the assassination, not even about the Warren report. He never saw a news story about it until 10 years ago when someone brought him a copy of a book and he read it, and then he realized that they were using the single bullet that he found as their single bullet theory. Now, the FBI will say in the beginning, before James Tague comes forward and says it was 3 bullets, 2 hit Kennedy and 1 hit Johnson separately. 1 hit Kennedy in the back, 1 hit Kennedy in the head, 1 hit Johnson in the back and went through his thigh. And there were 3 bullets. That's what they were going for. But then James Tague comes forward and says, hey, I got scratched by concrete from a bullet ricocheting off the curb, and I was bleeding. So now they have 4 bullets they have to account for, okay? And so what they do is they concoct this theory that the bullet goes in the president's back. As it's traveling at a downward angle, it changes its course, like I went over earlier, goes up, back up at an upward angle, and pops through the president's throat. And that's the one that hit Connally. So let's listen to see what Landis has to say here. I personally believe his story. I believe he realized he screwed up, and that's why he never mentions that other bullet in his report. And that because of the guilt over time, what happens that people, they're at the deathbed confession. He's like 80-something years old. This is why he's telling it now. And it has nothing to do with him hearing about it 10 years ago. He knew what the theory was back in the 60s, but he kept quiet because he realized this would change everything. There would be a conspiracy. People would realize from the get-go that everybody, the whole story we've been hearing for 60 years is a complete lie. But he decided to wait because what now? JFK, if he had lived, would have been over 100 years old. Oswald, if he had lived, would have been in his 80s, just like Landis. Everybody that was involved in that situation are all dead now. So that's why he's coming forward now. He's at the end of his life. He realized all the chaos that would have ensued, probably a revolution. There probably would have been a revolution in the United States that would have overthrown the government, and the fear of the communists and the Russians was greater than the fear of the right-wing assassins in the government who murdered their own president. Okay? That's essentially what has happened here. And then it's very disturbing to hear him say that he still believes in the Warren Commission report, even though he knows the whole thing's full of shit because of the bullet that he put on that stretcher has nothing to do with the bullet that hit Connolly. Anyway, we're going to get into this. Okay.
Thanks so much, Liz. Paul Landis, a witness to the assassination and author of the book The Final Witness, joins us now. And James Robinault, a presidential historian who wrote the profile in Vanity Fair on Paul's book, joins us as well. First off, Mr. Landis, thank you so much for joining us. I can't imagine the trauma of seeing what you saw and then having to relive it for decades. Thank you so much for speaking to us tonight. I know this is decades and decades in the past, but what do you remember starting with the first shot all the way to discovering?
Also, I just want to say something about Landis and his generation. Okay. This, the post-World War II generation, would be my parents' generation, okay, is that they were the inheritors of this generation of people from World War II that just didn't talk about shit, okay? You went home, you got drunk, you beat your wife and your kids, and you didn't talk about that kind of stuff. And then the kids end up on drugs, the kids end up criminals, all kinds of stuff, and then you cut them off and you say, it's their problem and all these things. And it's because of people like Landis, okay, and his generation that didn't speak up, okay, and kept quiet, that we have a lot of the problems that we have today. It's that culture of silence, okay, that just don't talk about this, don't talk about that, don't talk about these things. I remember, you know, my granddad and my parents and how they were about, oh, well, we don't talk about this now, we'll talk about this in the morning. And it's all bullshit, and it's caused us nothing but chaos and all kinds of problems because of Landis's generation, my parents' generation, of not talking about things. And here we are, 60 years later, in a democracy that's in total chaos based on a lie. You know, how do you continue to believe in democracy and believe in freedom and the Constitution and our government when you know that members of our government, right-wing members, extreme, hardcore right-wing members of our government participated in the murder of an elected official, our President of the United States? Everything you built on that is a lie. And you can't build a house on lies. You can't build the foundation of a country or a culture on lies. And that's what we've done for 60 plus years, is because of people like Landis, people like my parents and my grandparents' generation have been built on a whole generation of lies and silence. And it's destroyed this country. And you see where we're at now? We're in total chaos. We can't get anything done. We're almost completely bankrupt. The cost of living is out of sight. No one can afford a home nowadays. The American dream is completely gone. Our health is completely declining down. And these are all symptoms of building a country and a culture on 60 plus years of lies, of which the JFK is just one, assassination is just one aspect. So let's see what this man from this generation of liars has to say.
Bring the bullet.
Well, I remember the first shot came from over my right shoulder. I turned around to look to see where it was coming from.
I scanned quickly the grassy knoll area that was in front of us or to our right. I looked at President Kennedy. I did not realize he'd been hit at that moment. He was raising his arms, and I thought he was leaning to the left. I thought he was turning to see where the sound came from. Just after that, I scanned quickly to the right, back again. I was looking at the president when the second sound happened. I still did not see any reaction from anybody in the presidential limo.
This is Landis right here. There's Clint Hill, and there's Landis behind him. Okay? Now, you see how they're all turning back towards the school book depository. And you can see right here, so there's Clint Hill. He realizes the president's been shot. You see, he's the only one looking at the president. You can see the president, his arms are up because now he's been shot in the throat. So his arms are up, and he's trying to, you know, it's a reflex reaction. You get a pain, you get shot in the throat, cut in the throat, hit in the throat, whatever, your arms are automatically going to go up. You see Jackie's white glove as she's grabbing at his elbow, and she's looking at him, trying to figure out what's going on. You can see Clint Hill realizes something has happened. He's looking directly at the president. I've gone over these things before in other videos. You see the drivers here realize something has happened. You can see that the limo has almost come to a stop. The Secret Service vehicle, I think they call this the Beast, has closed in on the back end of the limo, and that's because the limo is completely slowed down here. The other agents right here are looking backward, but you see the motorcycle policeman, especially this one right here, he's looking over at the president. This one here is going to be covered in the brain matter of the president as the back of the president's head is completely blown off onto the trunk, and this brain matter flies into the face and the helmet of this policeman to the back left of the president. If these shots are coming from the back right, there's no way in hell any of that brain matter would be splattering off to the back left of the president. Anyway, that's Landis right there. And I do find it interesting that they have the two youngest guys, okay, and we're going to show you video. They were supposed to be walking along beside the president, and they were waved off. So that the president's cover was completely destroyed and completely gone there, okay? Because if Landis and the other agents were walking along, actually, these two agents and these two agents should have been walking like one by the door here and one at the tail. So as soon as the president, or they heard his shot, they would have jumped on top of the president and saved him from getting shot from the grassy knoll. But whoever set this up had someone in control of the Secret Service that was allowed them to wave it off. Now they'll tell you that it was President Kennedy's reasoning to wave off his Secret Service protection so more people could see him and Jackie. Bullshit. Anyway, we'll get into Landis again.
And at that point, we were approaching the underpass, and I heard a loud report that came very shortly after the second one. We flew through the underpass. During this whole time, the 6 seconds that took place, I saw Clint Hill running to the president's limo.
Let's look at this picture here.
During this whole time, the 6 seconds that took place, I saw Clint Hill running to the president.
Now you see, Governor Connolly and his wife are sitting on the jump seats. Okay? The president, okay, they like to say that the jump seats were more center of the limo, but you can clearly see here that Governor Connolly is up against the door and his arm is on the door. Okay? And so there's no way that if the bullet flew out of the president's neck, it would have gone out this way and then turned and come back and gone into the right side of Connolly's shoulder. Impossible.
President's limo reaching to get up on the trunk. He got up there just as Mrs. Kennedy seemed to be reaching out up over the trunk and getting back. And Clint pushed her back into the seat, covered the body, and we flew under the underpass. And I had no idea where we were going. I assumed it was closest hospital available. We arrived at Park.
Hold on one second.
Clint pushed her back into the seat, covered the body, and we flew under the underpass. And I had no idea where we were going. I assumed it.
You see here, you see how Clint Hill is climbing. There's a step on the bumper here, and then they have these handles on each side. So essentially, if the limousine was going faster than someone could run alongside, the agents would hold on, be on the back bumpers, and hold on to the backs here. That way their bodies were closer to the president. Because essentially, what is a Secret Service agent in the president's detail? Okay? He's a blocker. He's a bullet taker. Okay? That's the job of a Secret Service agent, is to take a bullet for the president. Okay? That is their job. It's not a glorious job, but everybody that's on that detail volunteers and they know that's what their main job is. The protection was removed so you wouldn't have anyone running alongside or hanging on the back of the bumpers here. So you would give a clear shot from behind and front straight to the president. And that's exactly what they had.
It was closest hospital available. We arrived at Parkland Memorial Hospital. I jumped out of the follow-up car and raced up to Mrs. Kennedy in the limo. I reached over and took her by the shoulders and asked her if I could help her. She said, no, I want to stay with him. I want to stay with the president. About that time, Clint entered the rear of the car and realized that Mrs. Kennedy was hiding the president's head and didn't want anybody to see the head wound. So he immediately convinced her he took off his suit coat, covered her head, his president's head, and they started to get up to leave the limousine. In the meantime, while this was happening, I happened to look to the right where Mrs. Kennedy was sitting, and sitting in a pool of blood there, I saw two bright brass bullet fragments. I picked one of them out, looked at it, and it was kind of like the end of my little pinky. It was mushroomed, and I put it back right exactly where I found it. And by then, Mrs. Kennedy was standing up, and I was looking around for other agents I didn't see.
So what he's talking about right there, okay, are bullet fragments that came out of the back of the head as the bullet went to the front skull. And if it was a frangible bullet, it would have exploded. Once it got inside the skull, it would have exploded, broken into these little shards of metal. Some of those would have been blown out onto the trunk and onto the street. Others, you remember, she gets out, she climbs out of her seat and climbs onto the trunk, and she wasn't trying to escape. She wasn't trying to help Clint Hill get in the car. She was in shock. Her husband's head just got blown out the back, and the reason why she climbed onto the trunk is because she saw the hole when he fell into her lap. She saw in the trunk there was a portion of his scalp with his hair on it, on the trunk. It had been blown backwards. So she climbed onto the trunk to grab a piece of the scalp, okay? Mixed within that scalp and the blood were these frangible bullet fragments, okay? She gets back into the car, and Clint Hill gets on top of them. When they get to the hospital, she hands a piece of the scalp and brain matter to the surgeon and asking him, with this help, like, can you put him back together? Can you put this back on his brain and put him sewing back together and make him good again? She's in shock, so of course that doesn't make any sense. But, I mean, what else is she supposed to do? She just saw her husband's brains blown out right in front of her, and she's in shock. So, quite understandable what's going on there. So what he's seeing, okay, so what he's seeing is metal fragments from that frangible bullet that was fired from the grassy knoll and hit the president in the forehead and blew out the back of his head, which all of the Parkland doctors and nurses said there was a huge hole in the back of the president's head. I think they call it the parietal occipital, which is the back of the president's head, not the front of his head, okay? But we'll go into all that, and then we're going to get into the second part here where he finds the actual bullet.
See anybody, but I saw an intact, fully bullet on the back of the seat where the cushioning met the trunk of the car. And I picked it up and looked at it, and it was, only thing I noticed that was wrong with it were bullet striations. There was no other deformities. I started to put it back. Mrs. Kennedy and Clint were leaving the car, and I made a quick decision. I didn't see anybody to secure the car. People were emerging on the car. I did not want this piece of evidence to disappear, and I slipped it into my pocket. We raced through the lobby of the emergency room. On the way out of the car, I noticed Mrs. Kennedy's pillbox hat, her clutch purse, and I picked them up, and then I noticed there was a Zippo cigarette lighter on the seat. It was all covered with blood, and I turned it over, and it had the presidential seal on it. I thought it was Mrs. Kennedy's. It came out of her purse. Didn't think anything else of it, but I figured that Mrs. Kennedy didn't need to see this. So I slipped that in my pocket too, and figured I would give it to Provey, her personal maid, when we got back to the White House. As we raced through the lobby of the emergency room, we got to trauma room 1.
Again, maybe he was in shock, but absolutely unbelievable and unforgivable that a law enforcement official would disturb a crime scene, pick up the bullet that came out of the President of the United States and just slip it in his pocket. And he's saying there's no one around the car to secure the crime scene? I mean, we all seen those videos of all the sheriffs in their white hats and the policemen in their motorcycle helmets surrounding the car, and other Secret Service agents inside of them, and they're holding off the press and he's saying there's no one around the car to secure the scene? No. Clint Hill has the president's body, and I'm sure there's other Secret Service agents and medical personnel that have the president's body. Okay, fine. Pick up the purse, pick up the lighter, but leave the fucking bullets there. Really, you should leave everything there. Okay? So, not only did they intentionally or unintentionally disturb the crime scene, remove the bullets and the bullet fragments from the crime scene, they lied about how they got to where they were at. He lies about it because he realizes he's broken the law, and that's why he doesn't mention it. And so the number one rule in a government job is cover your ass. The number one rule in a government agency is cover the agency's ass. So he probably told somebody in the agency, his boss, I found this bullet, I put it on the stretcher. You did what? Well, don't put that in the fucking report. Where's this bullet at? Well, they found it on the stretcher. That's the magic bullet that they're talking about. Holy shit. Landis, what the fuck were you thinking? That's most likely what would have happened. And that's what he realizes, whether he told someone or didn't. He realized he fucked up. And that's why he didn't tell nobody. And that's why he's 80-something years old now, and he's finally telling somebody. He knew about the fucking, single bullet theory. How can you be an American, living in America for 60 years, and be in this Secret Service detail and not know anything about the single bullet fucking theory? Impossible. Bullshit. I'm calling bullshit. Okay? But now we're supposed to feel sorry for him because he's this guilt-ridden 80-year-old man, right? Bullshit. It's just another part of them covering up of the assassination of the president and covering their own fucking ass. They stole the body from the Parkland Hospital. The autopsy should have been performed in Texas. The investigation should have been performed in Dallas and Texas. They stole the body. They stole the investigation. They stole the evidence. They performed a BS autopsy with two professors who'd never conducted autopsies ever before. And then they write up an autopsy report saying that the bullet, we're going to go through this, went through the president's body from the back and popped out of his neck, but they never probed the hole. It doesn't take much. All you have to do is take a probe, stick it through the hole, and if it goes through the back, it should come out of the fucking president's neck. And they never did it. They never. But they wrote it in the autopsy report that that's what happened. And then they said that the president's front part of his brain was blown out when it clearly shows in x-rays and photographs that the back of the president's head was blown out. That's complete lying on a government form. Trump's on trial in New York City for lying on a government form, and you have two Navy doctors lying on an autopsy form. The Navy doctors burnt their handwritten notes. Okay? Why? Because, there was blood on the notes, and they didn't want that to be on the official record. Bullshit. There's other notes that have blood all over it. So it's either incompetence or they purposely had a Secret Service agent involved in the assassination to clean up the mess. Okay? I remember this movie, Munich. Okay? and they'd send in the assassins. And the guys would boom, 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 after they cornered the guy in the hallway, right? They kill him, and then those guys leave. And then another guy, I don't know why you would just have the same guys who shot clean them up for themselves, but another guy walks in, a cleaner, and he picks up the shells, and he cleans up all the evidence that can be found that relates them to the crime. He's a cleaner. So maybe this is what this Secret Service agent, I lean towards more he's just fucking young and incompetent. But they definitely cleaned up the crime scene. They went in and hosed it down at the hospital to wash out the blood and all the hair and the evidence. That's destruction of a crime scene. Because if the Dallas Police Department forensic guys came, they would keep that limousine there. But no, they took the limousine, put it back on Air Force One, so the Dallas forensic policemen couldn't photograph it or investigate it. They took the president's body so the coroner for the county of Dallas couldn't do a proper autopsy. They stole the president's body and put it on the plane and hightailed it out of town before anybody could do any investigation. They took the limousine and they sent it to Detroit that day and had it completely cleaned out and new glass put in the limousine. Why would they need to put new glass in the limousine? Supposedly, it was broken by fragments that came out of Kennedy's head, right? Right? No, maybe a bullet came through from the outside, and that's what they were trying to hide. Again, destruction of evidence of a crime scene. If it happened nowadays, it'd be against the law. If it happened nowadays, you'd have Republicans launching investigations against the FBI and the Secret Service about the assassination of Trump or whoever got killed. Okay? That's what would happen in the cover-up of the assassination. So, again, what my hypothesis is that right-wing elements of the CIA, the FBI, and a few people in the Secret Service and the Dallas Police Department conspired to kill the President of the United States because they thought he was getting too chummy with the fucking communists. They didn't want him getting out of Vietnam, and he was not trying to kill Castro and overthrow the government there. He was being too soft on the communists, and they enlisted the help of the mafia. Basically, the team, Operation 40 or Operation Mongoose, the team that was put up to kill Castro, they turned their guns on the President of the United States. It's exactly what they did. And then they used, you don't need everybody involved in the agency to be involved in the conspiracy. All you need is a few key people. Same thing in the Dallas Police Department. You just need some like-minded people. That's why they picked Dallas. They didn't try to kill him in New York City or Boston. They killed him in Dallas, okay? Johnson's territory. The vice president who becomes president, okay? Anyway, we're going to get back into what he has to say. But again, it just disgusts me that Landis probably heard things happen, that they tried to cover it up. If you didn't know about the assassination was done by members of the Secret Service and right-wing members of the government, that he definitely heard about the cover-up. This is why he couldn't sleep. This is why he quit the Secret Service, is because of the guilt that he helped participate in killing the president and didn't realize there was an assassination attempt But to speak out would get him also killed or discredited. And this is why he's saying what he's saying now at 80 fucking years old. But it's all been sanitized, so it's just an innocent thing that happened.
They had to pivot the gurney that the president's body was on and push it into the trauma room. There was a crowd that kind of had joined us doing this. I was pushed right up next to the president's body and standing right next to his feet. Everybody in the room was focused on the head wound. I could not look, but I knew I would pass out if I saw it. And all these things are whirling through my mind on what to do. And I realized this was a perfect place to leave a bullet with the president's body. And
another problem I have with this is that I've listened to the House assassination investigators' questioning of the head nurse in Trauma Room 1 where the president was at. And no Secret Service were allowed inside Trauma Room 1, only members of the medical staff. The Secret Service guarded the doors. So, again, I got a question there. He wasn't in the trauma room. He was in the preparation room when they put the president on the gurney. That's where he put the bullet. And then they moved him into the trauma room. He wasn't standing around at the president's feet while the doctors were taking care of the president's head because he wasn't allowed in there. He wasn't prepped. And what that means, you got to wash their hands, you got to wear a gown, you got to wear a mask and a cap. He didn't do any of that. He wasn't there. He was outside of Trauma Room 1 because this is what the nurse, the head trauma room nurse said, is that the Secret Service agents, we put them outside because none of them wanted to prep, which means they didn't want to get cleaned up.
would be found during the autopsy about that time. So I read.
And you see this is CE 399, okay, right there. And if you take the portions of the bullet, okay, that have been forced off of this bullet, shredded off of this bullet, I don't know the exact amounts, but they only weigh a certain amount. We'll just say 1 milligram or whatever. And then you take the portions of the bullets, shrapnel that came off inside of Kennedy and Connolly, and you put all those together because, again, this head trauma room nurse, they collected all of those because they had the x-rays and they knew where these metal pieces were from the x-rays and they could pull it right out of the flesh. Connolly still has portions of the metal in his body, in his casket now, he was buried with. But they took out as much as they could. And if you add up all that metal, that equals, say, 3 milligrams. So any student, okay, of addition and subtraction, going back to elementary school, will tell you that 3 milligrams cannot go into 1 milligram. You can't take 3 milligrams and crush it down to 1 milligram. Okay? So what that means is that the amount of metal that was in JFK and Connolly is greater than the amount of metal that was missing from this bullet. So what this bullet is the bullet that hit Kennedy in the back. And then there was another bullet that came through and hit Connolly. Okay? Whether it hit Kennedy in the neck and then hit Connolly, it hit Connolly. And then that bullet shattered someplace inside the limousine, probably behind, in front of Connolly, or into the door somewhere. Because that's where, well, no, let's see, it would have been into the floor, or that bullet was in Connolly's leg when he got there, and they found it somewhere. So what they try to say is that this bullet was the bullet that went through the president's back, went up, went through the neck, hit Connolly in the back, hit his shoulder blades, came out of his chest, going through his ribs, hit his wrist, and then went down into his thigh, going into his femur, okay, and shattering in his thigh there somewhere. But that bullet wasn't there. Because don't you think that bullet would have shown up in the x-rays? But there was no bullet there in the x-rays, only fragments. So what that tells you is that bullet went through his leg and is in the fucking car somewhere, in the floorboard. Or at least portions of it were in the floorboard. And they knew that, and when they stripped the limousine and redid it, they destroyed that evidence of the other bullet that hit Connolly. So what we have, I'll just jump ahead, we'll come back to it, is that you got a bullet, this is the minimums, a bullet hitting the president in the back, which is this one, 399. It pops out when the president is knocked backwards, and it's sitting on the rim. That's the one that Landis finds. Another bullet comes down from behind, hits Connolly in the back, goes through his chest, goes through his wrist, lands in his thigh, and then pops out and hits into the floor of the limousine. That's number 2. Another bullet smashes into the front right of the president's forehead and blows out the back of the president's head. That's some of the fragments that he finds, okay? Another bullet, bullet number 4, at least number 4, I'm of the opinion there are at least 7 or 8, smashes into the curb, chunks off a portion of the curb which hits Tague, okay, and cuts his cheek. That's bullet number 4. They'll also tell you, and you can actually see it, that there is a signpost at the corner of Houston and Elm, and they'll say that when Oswald was trying to fire, he fired too soon and hit that lamppost. That bullet bounced off and flew 100 yards over and hit Tague, although Tague will tell you, and we're going to go over this, that he heard 3 shots and then he was hit. So that's bullet number 5. You'll also see people diving in the exact spot where witnesses found ground hole moles, they call them, where a bullet burrowed its way into Dealey Plaza. You'll also see where even Clint Hill, other Secret Service agents and motorcycle policemen say they saw bullets ricocheting and skirting off the pavement in front of the president's car and behind the president's car. So that's 6 or 7 bullets right there. And then you've got the throat wound, whether that came from the back or came from the front. So that's at least 8 bullets. And if you've got a guy that you're trying to frame up on the 6th floor and there's only 3 casings that you find, you got to bring it down to 3 bullets. Another question I have is, if you're going to shoot the President of the United States and you have a rifle that has a clip that holds at least, 7, 8 rounds, why do you only put 4 rounds in the clip? Don't you think you're going to miss, maybe? Don't you think you don't have enough time to fire all 7 rounds? And why wait till the president, which is coming right at you, wait until he turns and is going away from you downhill? Why not fire all 7 rounds? Another thing, too, that people don't think about is that they have silencers for rifles. They also have flangeable, dum-dum explosive bullets, okay, that make a bigger hole. Also, when these bullets hit and they explode, they don't leave a bullet to be found because it's been shattered into 100 pieces. And the fragments go all over the place. So it's hard to find a bullet out of a shattered piece of shrapnel, which is what Landis finds. So what we're looking at here, okay, another thing I just want to mention is that if this is the bullet that hits the president in the back, okay, and then Connolly gets hit in the back, the cycle rate of this Mannlicher Carcano is longer than the firing rate of these 2 bullets, which means that the bullet that hit Kennedy in the back for this round and the bullet that hit Connolly in the back were fired from 2 separate rifles from behind him. Okay? So then what we have are 3 teams of shooters. You've got 1 firing from the Texas School Book Depository 6th floor. Maybe fires the round, this one that hits Kennedy in the back. You've got another person or shooting team firing from the Dowtex that hits Connolly in the back. Okay? You've got another one that fires from the front from the grassy knoll that hits the president in the front, whether it's the throat wound or the head wound. So they had 3 teams to pick off the president in a triangulation of fire to guarantee that he didn't get out alive. He almost did. Okay? He almost did. The Carcano was just to make noise. You see in the photos where all the agents are looking backwards. And I'm going to show you in the Zapruder film where the little girl in the white coat and the red dress running along the right side of the president all of a sudden stops. And then if you back it up just about 5 seconds and you look at the president, you see him waving. And he's waving to the right. And at the same time the girl stops, the president's arm comes down and he stops waving. And he turns and starts to look to the right. So what's happened is a bullet someone has fired from the 6th floor to get everybody looking backwards. And then another bullet comes in. That's probably the bullet that hit the metal sign and went off into the field somewhere. Then another bullet hits the president in the throat. And you see just before he goes past the sign, his arms start to come up. Then another bullet hits the president in the back. And then another bullet hits Connolly in the back. And then the other bullet shoots over near Tague. Now Tague's going to tell you that he was looking at the grassy knoll where he heard the sounds coming from. And then he was hit. So that tells you that unlike the Warren Commission, which says that Tague was hit by the first bullet that bounced off the lamppost, Tate said, no, I was looking over at the grassy knoll where I heard the sounds of the shots coming from, and then I was hit. That means he got hit by the last of the bullets. And then there's either one or two bullets that hit the president from the front right side from the grassy knoll and blow his head off. Anyway, we'll keep going.
Reached out, I put the bullet on the gurney right by his feet. And about that time, the doctors were asking everybody to leave. Somebody came in and said, please, let me through. And somebody else, another doctor, asked everybody to leave, but give them room to work. So we turned and kind of joined the crowd going out of the trauma room. Mrs. Kennedy had come in and she kind of slipped to the left of the door entrance. So I kind of stood there with her while everybody was leaving. And then I followed her out when she stepped out. I spotted Clint and Roy Kellerman in an office to the left, and I walked over to tell Clint I was going to be over with Mrs. Kennedy, and at that point he was on a phone. What else from there?
Paul, sorry, real fast, Paul. When you found that bullet, this bullet has become the focal point of so much history. When you found that bullet, was it lodged in a cushion? You said it had striations. Was it lodged in the cushion? Was it just sitting on the back of the seat next to where the convertible came down? How would you describe its condition when you found it?
It was perfect condition. It was not buried or sunken in a seam. It was just lying where the seam on the back of the seat meets the middle of the trunk. And it's where they would have attached the bubble top if they had or were putting it on.
And you got a good look at it. Did it have any blood or any sort of matter on it?
I didn't notice any blood. It was like everybody wrote or says, it was a pristine bullet. The only thing on it were rifle striations.
Another thing, not as likely, the president, a lot of people don't know this, that the president at that time was wearing a back brace. It was a cloth and metal back brace that went from his pelvis area up to right below his armpits. And it went all the way around the back. Now this bullet, I don't know exactly how far up, if he was sitting, the back brace would have gone, but this bullet could have been slowed down by the back brace. So if the bullet went through the back brace and then into the president's back, the back brace could have slowed down this bullet, but I'm not sure the height of where that back brace would have ended at the top there. But, you know, a lot of people don't know that the president was wearing a back brace. He had been injured in World War II in this PT boat when his PT boat was rammed by this Japanese destroyer and cut in half. He was injured, and then they swam to these islands, and then they were picked up later. He had also been in a plane crash in the 50s when he was a congressman in a storm, and had back surgery for that. He was on a lot of medication for pain, severe pain and migraines. Again, all these stories about President Kennedy screwing around with 10, 20 different women, I find almost impossible because he was virtually a cripple, okay? Without his back brace, he couldn't really stand up. He couldn't really do anything. So all these of women that have come forward and said, yeah, I had an affair with Kennedy, I'm very dubious of. Okay, because I guess you can still have sex even if you're lying on your back, I guess. But to say that he was having the amount of sex that they claim, I find very, very dubious, and it's just another way to, kill our hero, to make him less of a person by destroying his reputation. Anyway, we'll keep going.
And that's all I noticed at the time. And this was all.
Do you think?
No, I'm sorry.
Do you think that the bullet that you found at the back of the car, do you think that one was possibly the one that hit President Kennedy in the back and then may have fallen back out in the second shot? Or do you think that might have been the shot that missed? I know you described only hearing 2 gunshots. What are your thoughts?
I did hear 3 gunshots.
You heard 3 gunshots. So do you think that it was the one that went in his back, or do you think that this might have, I don't know, been the other one that was never found?
I didn't have any thoughts at that time. All I saw was a bullet that was there, and I wanted to preserve it and make sure that it didn't get lost. That's basic.
Again, if you're trying to distract people and get them looking in certain directions, you'd want a loud rifle shot, and then you would just fire off 3 of them very, very loud. Now, I've heard, I've been close to machine guns with silencers, and when those go off just 5 feet away from me, it sounds like an air compressor, like a like that. Not a boom, 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 boom. And I've been near, guns that have gone off right beside me, and they're very, very loud. That's another reason, like for the 38, the police used to like the 38 because it was a very, very loud weapon. Okay? That make it where it goes off and boom, boom, like that. And that echoes down, so if you're in a city, that echoes down the street. And instinctively, what people do when they hear gunshots is they look in that direction, and they sometimes, if it's too close, they duck. Okay? So that's why they fired off the Carcano 3 times. And the other weapons could fire with the silencers, and no one would hear that. Okay? But those weapons would leave signatures like puffs of smoke, which is what people saw coming off the grassy knoll.
Yeah.
And we've heard from Clint Hill, the other Secret Service agent there. He questions your account, saying it doesn't make any sense to him. What do you make of that?
I really don't know. That's Clint's theory. That's his thought. We never talked to each other after the assassination about the events. We worked together for the next 7 months. I really can't answer what his thinking is.
Again, maybe this is just part of that generation that they don't talk about shit, but it's been my experience that any fucking traumatic event, this would be definitely a traumatic event, that happens among co-workers, policemen, anyone. People talk about that shit. Maybe they didn't back then. I don't know. Maybe they're all robots back then. But, it's been 22 years since 9/11, and I still talk about 9/11 with my friends, okay? I got a friend I'm talking to now about shit that happened in the 70s, okay? That I still have questions about and need clarification. People talk about shit. So it's him to sit there and say, I'm not going to call him a liar, but I very highly much doubt it that you just went through this traumatic experience and you never had coffee, or you never mentioned any of it at the lunchroom at the government GSA cafeteria, that, hey, you know, whew, we were really lucky we didn't get shot that day in Dallas. And can you believe that shit? No, I can't. I still can't believe it to this day, even 20 years later. That's the way people really are. But to sit there and say you worked with some guy for 7 months and you never, ever, ever talked about something that happened to the two of you, and the guy was standing 2 feet in front of you, and he ran up to that car and jumped into the car ahead of you, and you never said, hey, you know, way to go, Clint. That was fast thinking when you jumped off that car and ran to the president under fire like that. Wow. I wouldn't have had the balls to do that. You mean that conversation never occurred? Come on. Bullshit. What are you, a bunch of robots back in the 60s? Maybe. But I tell you, I mean, people, and this is another reason, probably a reason why he had to quit. Because you don't talk about, people back then, they didn't talk about shit. And they suffered silently from the trauma. And they became alcoholics, and they beat their wives, and they beat their kids because they didn't talk about it. So maybe, yeah, maybe he didn't talk about it. But I'm telling you nowadays, is some shit like that happen, you're definitely going to talk about it. And to sit there and say you never heard about the single bullet theory and the Warren report, never bothered to read about the Warren report, never read the newspaper, never saw anything on TV about it for 60 fucking years. Bullshit. Bullshit. You had a traumatic experience that caused you to quit the fucking Secret Service because you had nightmares about it. But you mean every time you saw a headline in a newspaper, you completely ignored it? Every time they had something on TV, you completely ignored it? Every time someone said, hey, what did you do for work? Oh, I was in the Secret Service. Oh, wow. The Secret Service really screwed up in Dallas, didn't they? No, they didn't, because I was in that detail. You never had that conversation with your brother, your uncle, your cousins, at family reunions, at Thanksgiving, at Christmas? Never? Bullshit. You didn't have a crazy uncle that said, hey, did you hear about this Warren report and the single bullet theory while you're sitting down there trying to eat your damn turkey and watch the football game for 60 fucking years? Bullshit. What we have here, man, is a guy trying to clear his conscience at 80 years old before he goes meet, has his Jesus moment and meets his maker. But he's sanitizing it, okay? So people don't come to his grave and piss on his fucking grave and hammer his fucking tombstone. This is what he's doing. This is exactly what he's doing. He's clearing his consciousness, okay, so he can go to his maker in peace, but he doesn't want any bad thing to happen to his tombstone or to his family. Because somebody could have sued his fucking ass for allowing a lie to go on for 60 fucking years. Anyway, we'll pick this up next time.